Hey everybody, good morning or good afternoon according to where you're, or even good evening according to where you're listening into from. It's Louisa Munson here from Feel Good Conversations at Feel Good Astrology, and I'm joined by lovely, brilliant, awesome Rick Pursell, who has been up since 6 a.m. your time with his hands in Mother Earth. Now, I just got that off air before we went live. So, Rick, do you want to just tell me why you set up your day like that this morning? And what kind of effect has it had on you?
Well, I yes. Good morning to you. Some time ago I was putting 4, 5, sometimes 8 hours in the garden, and for me it's a very mindful meditation. Even if I'm just pulling out weeds or planting some new seeds, planting them out, bringing on things, repotting, I just find it really connected to the earth, and I enjoy it. But I've been writing so much that I've been coming to the office virtually every day and doing some writing. But getting to the end of that, and what I've decided to do is on the weekends, I'll spend 2 or 3 hours in the garden. However, this week we have a 3-day weekend because it is called Galangran.
What's Galangran?
It's a Balinese Hindu holiday. Actually, it's over 2 weeks, over a fortnight. But our kids are off school for 3 days. And it is where the forces of good overcome the forces of evil and shadow. So the forces of light overcome the forces of shadowness. So I'm calling it a weekend. So got up at daybreak did about 3 hours of gardening, and the same yesterday and same tomorrow. So I'm really loving it. It's a great way to start the day.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing I do, like when I've got out of bed and just attended to my like immediate things thereafter, and it's usually just after I put the kettle on or something, I go into my backyard and I check on my seedlings and give them a little water. And I've been studying the caterpillars. We've got a couple of chrysalis or chrysali, I guess, a couple of different species, and each day, like, the children and I are watching it, and I love it. And I was really disappointed to notice that my dog had dug up some of my young tender chard. I'm not very happy about that, but yes, it's beautiful. Your Galangan, it's interesting timing, isn't it? Diwali's just happened as well.
Yes.
The Hindu Festival of Light. I wonder, are they connected in some way?
Well, it's all part of Hinduism, except for the Balinese calendar is quite unique. Right. So there may be some difference in that. But it's pretty well the same principle, allowing the light to go beyond the shadow, not to dissipate it or run away from it or to suppress it, but just to go beyond it, just as we have the capacity to go beyond fear and the ego into a different place. So it's good.
That's wonderful. It's funny because, like, normally we get like right down to the subject straight away. But I don't know, I'm wondering, can you see the comparison of us exploring the idea of light with the idea of critical thinking? What does critical thinking bring up for you, Rick?
Well, it's certainly on the step. Why do we need to think critically? Well, first of all, what it is, it's disciplined, clear, open-minded analysis of evidence. That's what critical thinking is. So on the path to truth, and let me clarify that, there appears to be two truths. One is our own personal truth. What is true for me may not be true for you or someone else. We may find commonality in that we share that truth, but it is a personal truth.
Yeah.
And that's part of our journey, is to uncover what is true for me. What is my belief about something as opposed to what did I inherit from my parents, or what is somebody else's belief that I've taken on
Yeah.
that is not really my truth. So that's part of that process. And then it appears to be at another level, there appears to be a universal truth that is universal. It is common to consciousness, is that we arrive at perhaps a group of thoughts or truths that are common to lots of people. So
So
go
is
ahead.
that, I guess that could be to do with the world that we share, the resources that we share, what's occurring to our communities. Is that where the sort of communal truth comes in, or is it a lot more rigorous than that?
I think we'll call it universal truth. So it is much grander and bigger, and it goes beyond. It appears to go beyond duality. So it's another realm of what is the truth. So our personal truth can be shared as a community, as a religion, as a belief system, as ideology, as philosophy. It can be all of those, but they can also be separate to other people's truths that they have.
Yeah.
And part of our journey is to be able to respect, honor, and accept other people's truths, see their perspective, not necessarily agree on it, and we can always agree to disagree, but we must be willing to see the other person's perspective and allow them to have that. So this is where critical thinking comes in, because we need to have a very clear, open-minded analysis of any evidence or information, rather than being closed and saying, look, this is the only way it is. This is the only truth acceptable to me. That's not being open.
Yeah.
And it takes courage to step out of our comfort zone of what we've learned and what we believe in, to be even willing to look at another perspective, another point of view, or another view point. And this is where the openness comes in, and we have to be disciplined about the way we think about things. So that really, in essence, describes what critical thinking is. And if we are searching for the truth, which I think we all are, we've gone from all knowing down a dwindling spiral, and now we're coming back up to find out what is the truth, what is the meaning of life, who am I, all of those deeply profound questions. Then we need to be able to critically think our way through that in concert with discernment, in concert with intuition, and in concert with innate knowingness. So go ahead.
I was going to say it's kind of fascinating that you were saying that, like, when it comes in, we have to kind of go down into the basics of our belief systems before we can, like, rise up and connect to the spirituality. When I look at small children, which obviously I'm involved with all the time, it feels like the first 10 years, I guess, are helping them to understand or know the world that they're in, whilst also preparing them to be able to make their own decisions and have an open mind to be able to see things. We spend probably more time trying to tease, coax, and encourage our children to think their own thoughts. And actually, it's quite tiresome because children are very programmable, actually, which is why there's so many cartoons and things, like their model of the world. Their belief about what the world looks like is very much based on what they've seen around them. They absorb it. I don't think this comment was going anywhere other than that I observed that in the early stages, we're sort of like creating a foundational truth before rising up and going deeper. But the funny thing is, I think children are born with an understanding of innate truth. That I've seen in all my children, and I know that was really high in me. You know, like, so even though my parents might have been telling me about the world, I had very strong suspicions that the information that I was being given wasn't correct. It didn't match my innate knowing. But anyway, just thought I'd share that.
It's actually it's very valid, and it suits the topic perfectly. Whether the years have changed or not is irrelevant. But they have suggested in the first 7 years of our age, children can feel and sense things, but they may not be able to string together. They may not have critical thinking, right? They may not be able to string together coherent sentences, especially when they're little, right?
Yeah.
But they feel everything, and they express through emotions, the emotions of happiness and giggling and laughter, the emotions of crying and sadness, right? And perhaps a little bit of aggressiveness thrown in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that's considered to be the first compartment. From 7 to 14, we start to, and again, don't keep those years as absolutely critical, but we start to be able to figure out, we watch our parents and we figure out, well, I have to outthink them here.
Yeah.
So in essence, if you use, and from 14, again, this is all changed with the maturation of children these days. But from 14 to 21 was the exploration of the physicality. That's when we started taking more notice of what we look like and what we wear, and experimenting in sexuality and friendships and all those sort of things. So the three compartments of 7: feelings, thinking, and physicality. When you think of that, we've got the emotional mind, or then we've got the mental mind, and then we've got the physical body, right? Those three bodies: physical, mental, and emotional bodies. So critical thinking is not going to happen at a very early age. As thinking process matures, and as we engage in an educational process that supports teaching children how to think rather than what to think, then the maturation of the critical thinking can take place. And it's a question of seeking that truth and being willing to be open and open-minded, and to be able to analyze the information or evidence that we're getting. And as we know, this then becomes a lifelong process, and it's absolutely it is absolutely imperative that we have this capacity if we are to arrive at our own personal truth, not something that's been foisted upon us, not something that is somebody else's truth that we live in. And these compact into a belief system. So what we believe, from our beliefs will emanate our behaviors. So it wasn't that long ago that people would say, "Oh, I won't have an accident. It'll happen to somebody else." Right? So then they can perform at-risk behaviors that would likely lead them to an accident.
Yeah.
So if you believe that, so whatever you believe is going to be reflected in your behaviors. So this is why critical thinking and finding your truth is so vital to the decisions and behaviors that we perform. Back to you.
Oh, I don't know where to go, actually. Like, what do you think the dangers are, or the difficulties, or the blockages that people have right now in critical thinking?
Excellent question. With the advent of television, which not everybody has a television, but most of the Western world has a
Yeah.
television.
Or, I mean, they
And
all have devices like they have these now, don't they? That they can see
yes,
television on with
or
computers.
devices. Yes.
Yeah.
So whatever message is being sent on the news or through these TikTok or Facebook or YouTube, if it's consistently repeated, if you don't have critical thinking, you'll think, well, I've heard that so many times, it must be true.
Mm.
So we circumvent the actual discernment and our own analysis and accept in somebody else's truth. Well, I saw it on the television or I read it somewhere. Right? That doesn't, just because it's on the television or written somewhere, doesn't make it the truth, as we've all experienced.
Rick,
So,
it occurred to me the other day in a wild moment that, like we watch films, we might watch films, we might watch television series and things like that. And we know that they're drama, we know that they're fictitious. It occurred to me that the news might actually also be a work of fiction. Now, I've obviously thought on and off that maybe it was fictitious, but I had the thought the other day that maybe its whole inception and the intention behind it was fictitious. And actually it was like a program on its own, like EastEnders or Dallas or something like that, only it was called the news. But we all had this kind of strange belief that somehow it was automatically true. And whilst, like my husband might have said, you're just paranoid or whatever, actually I thought, wow, my mind must be really open to that possibility. Because, there's only so many times when you can receive news and then later research it and find out that actually what you were told didn't stand up. And then it just occurred to me, maybe it really is a work of fiction. Of it's like Truman Show, but just a thought. I had to say it then, or else I'd forget it. Sorry.
yes. Well, there was a newspaper in England years ago that started off, it was launched only to give good news because most of the headlines were all dramatic and bad news, and this person's done that, and this accident happened on the M1, and blah, blah, blah. So they decided that they would gather information from people and just produce this newspaper, regular newspaper, with good news. And I think it was less than a year before it folded up because people want the drama. Remember what Eckhart Tolle said about the pain body, which is the mental, emotional pain that permeates into the physical body. And the pain body sits outside of it. It's not seen, but it's there nonetheless. And what does the pain body want the most? It wants pain. So people will go to a horror movie,
Yes.
the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to watch the most grueling and horrific scenes, right? And we pay good money for that and call it entertainment. So the pain body thrives on this and it demands it. And that's why people will sit in front of the television at 6 o'clock at night watching CNN regurgitate some drama that 3 days later you won't hear anything about it.
Yes,
Another one will
that is
occur.
quite incredible, isn't it? That something that occupies your mind almost day in, day out for a few days, where this is the big thing. And then like a week later, you won't even realize that you stopped thinking about it.
Yes.
Because you're never aware that all of a sudden the news has stopped about it. There is a new story to replace it, a new drama, a new issue. But then when you look back and think, wow, how did that resolve? I don't remember. It was just taken out of my consciousness. It was just removed. And then something replaced It's fascinating how that kind of switcheroo occurs.
Yes, very surreptitiously. And
Mm,
of course, it's nearly all fear-based.
mm,
So it keeps people in a constant state of fear. And we've seen this over the last 18 months.
mm.
So is it fiction? No, I don't think that's fiction. I think it's real. It's
What the
programmed.
fear, the feel.
It's
Yeah.
programmed. It
Yes.
is consciously, deliberately programmed to keep people under control, in a state of fear, more obedient,
Mm.
and less critical thinking.
So
So
fear, by what you're saying, that the addition of fear stops us from being able to think critically. Is that right?
yes, it
I'm sure
does.
there are times when
Yeah.
we're fearful and we have laser-like focus, but maybe that's in the immediate danger. But so fear has some kind of suppression of the truth. Is that right?
Well, there's two kinds of fear. There's biological fear, right? And there's learned conditioned fear.
Hmm.
So if we've got biological fear, um, the people in La Palma at the moment, right, with the advent of what's going on with the volcano and the lava flows and all those houses being um, destroyed,
Mm,
that is a biological fear.
mm,
The organism is under threat. Its survival is being threatened. People are exodusing out of that because it's a very real threat.
mm.
But a programmed, conditioned fear that we learned from our parents, like don't touch spiders, right? Or if you're in Australia, sharks, spiders, and snakes. It's learned, right?
Mm,
I will often ask people, have you ever been bitten by a shark or a spider or,
mm,
or a snake? No, but they're dangerous. Yes, some of them are dangerous, but not all of them. Right? So there's where our critical thinking can feel in. There can be some biological disruption, and perhaps our survival could be threatened, and we can think very logically about it, critically think about it.
mm.
Whereas conditioned programmed thinking seems to alleviate the capacity to think clearly and analytically
Yeah.
because we're just running a program. Right? We're just, in the old days, we'd have a cassette tape, and we would hit the rewind and play it back again. And this
Mm,
is what, that is the one will obscure critical thinking. And that's why we need to have critical thinking and say, first of all, is this my belief?
mm,
Right? Am I being discerning about this? Is this believable? Is what being said? Is it being portrayed or lived or embodied?
mm.
Right? Because we know people will say anything to
Yeah.
get their way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm reminded of so many conversations over the last couple of years that I've I've had or observed. Um, like we have religious conviction, a lot of us have religious conviction as well, and I think a lot of our inner programming that we've had about the world is also a religious programming, whether we realize it or not. I remember talking to somebody um, about 9/11 and saying I thought it was an inside job. I had reason to believe it was an inside job, and the person kind of shouted me out of the house. You know, how dare you? All those people suffered. It's an outside job. It was the Muslims. It was an attack on Christianity. And it's like, whoa, okay. And I said, well, how do you actually know that? Well, I know that because I was told that by God. Um, and yet I've seen evidence to prove or to suggest, and my evidence is only as good as where it was created and how much I'm prepared to research it. But the whole situation of it didn't add up. And it was when I first met you, actually, that I sort of like came across alternative thinking around that. You know, up until that point, I had taken it as read. And so, like, when I thought, really, what, there might be an alternative narrative there, that maybe all is not well that we've been told. You know, I had to, it takes a lot to suspend what you've already believed about something. And I find often in those moments we defend our beliefs as if it's our very own identity. You know, the person that I was speaking to defended that belief that Muslims are bad and it's an attack on Christianity. Defended it so much as if I was attacking them.
Exactly.
Which from their perspective is exactly what they felt was happening. I was attacking their belief system. I was attacking them, therefore.
Yes. And that's why people react in that way, is because their belief about something, whether it's a lightweight belief or a very deep-seated one, when another perspective is shone onto the situation, it's going to shake their whole world. You know, you might have carried that belief around for years and years. So why don't people critically think? Because one, we haven't been taught how to think critically, much of it through our education. And the other is that we're lazy because we are spectators to the television, and the television gives us all of the news. So therefore we don't have to do the homework. Right? But you brought up a very good example, 9/11. Now, critical thinking would say that there are, I can't remember if it's between the two of the buildings or both of them, but there's about at least 1 million tons of structure. Let's call it just one building. It might be both. It doesn't matter. Right? If that's demolished, right, where did the 1 million tons of rubble go? Because the only rubble that was there was about 2 stories high. So we've all seen planned demolitions of buildings. Right? They crack in the middle and they fall down, and all the rubble is there. So that's one. The other one is you only have to ask is what is the highest temperature of aviation fuel, right? And what is the melting point of steel?
Yeah.
Right. So if we're prepared to ask some questions, we will maybe open to looking at, well, maybe there is something else there.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
every subject. Right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, a couple of things that stuck in my mind were the fact that there were several very well-trained pilots that tried to simulate what these apparent planes did, and we were told, like, the narrative suggested that some untrained people that had never flown a plane before had managed to fly 2 planes simultaneously into these 2 buildings and create a collapse, and also in the Pentagon. And again, there was no rubble or old plane fuselage at the Pentagon. And then I actually watched the BBC News live and saw the BBC News say that World Trade Center 7 had come down. The 7, building number 7 had come down because of the attack. And it was still standing in the background, and so
exactly.
and so you've got the fact that the steel vaporized. The way it came down didn't match a normal demolition, or matched a demolition and didn't match like a plane crash. There were pilots that said, well, this feat is impossible. We couldn't do that, and we've been doing it all our lives. How did that happen? And there were all these different things that didn't add up, and yet. And even though the research into it and the commission that was looked into it, that the official narrative that was given out was still that is what happened. And yet there's so many glaring errors, and so many people will, they've continued in their world for another 20 years, fully believing that there was an attack on Christianity, the American way of life, freedom, by a religious group who are fanatics, blah, blah, blah. And that one belief that possibly hasn't been thought about critically has resulted in several wars, several deaths, several indiscriminate bombings and things like that. To me, it seems like we have a responsibility, like a moral responsibility, to think, if things don't add up, what's my responsibility in this as an observer? Do I have a responsibility? Because if we go around with something that doesn't stand up and we're sowing our continuous belief into the world, what's the effect?
Yes.
But maybe I'm just an old cow. Maybe I'm a grumpy, suspicious, tinfoil hat wearing person. I don't know. I've certainly been called quite a few of those things. I'm just, I'm very curious.
Well, you know my history.
Yes.
The term conspiracy theorist was coined in the 50s by the CIA to quell 50s and 60s to quell any dissenting voice. And it was surrounded by the JFK assassination, right? The single shooter, where clearly there was more than one shooter, right?
Yeah.
All the evidence shows that. But so anybody that came up with a differing perspective or viewpoint on it was immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist.
A nut job.
And it's still being perpetrated with everything that comes about that doesn't meet the main narrative. So I'm going to throw in a couple more. And
go on, I'm all ears.
Everything in our bodies is spinning and turning. The atoms, the protons are spinning around each other. Our Earth is spinning, right?
And funny thing is, I don't feel that. I don't feel that spin, Rick.
That's right. I'm going to come back to that one.
My hair doesn't, like, if I jump up, no offense to your thinking, this is what I'm curious about. If I jump up and I was in the air for long enough, with the spin of the Earth, surely I would land in a slightly different place. In fact, there were free fallers that demonstrated that. So they went up in a plane and they, calculated for the wind drift and this, that, and the other. And they went sufficiently high enough and calculated the wind drift and knew that at the rate that they were falling at, that they should fall in and arrive in a different location according to the spin.
Exactly.
And that didn't happen.
Exactly. So why?
And how does that happen?
Okay. I'm not even going to go into that.
No, that's a whole nother conversation, isn't it?
But the fact is that when we get on a plane, we fly somewhere.
Yeah.
So here's the plane gets up in the air. Let's say it's a vertical takeoff.
Yeah.
All it would need to do is wait until the Earth spun round the location and come down again.
It needs to hover, right? And then and then land.
Why would it have to go up and fly to somewhere?
So, or it could change its location slightly. It might go slightly to the right or slightly to the left, and then just wait for the spin to come.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is what critical thinking is. It doesn't necessarily arrive at a conclusion. You can still be wide open to both situations.
Yeah.
But critical thinking makes you think about something. Well, hang on a minute. How do you explain this? How do we explain that everything in the universe is spinning and where the solar system is spinning, the Earth and Sun are moving and spinning around everywhere? How come we only see one side of the moon? Right? How is that possible, that we only see one side when everything else is in motion in the universe? So these are the questions that we want to ask ourselves, and we don't have to have an answer, and we don't have to be robotically pursuing it, saying this is the truth. We just can bring up some questions. Well, how about this? This seems to me or doesn't meet the narrative, or this
Mm.
seems to be unexplainable. And that's what critical thinking is.
Yeah.
Right? One day we will know the truth. Right? I believe that.
Yeah. I mean, you remember me telling you about my what seemed like a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience where I felt like I was like moving towards not the light. I was actually moving towards the universe. I was actually moving towards the dark, funnily enough. But in that moment of realization, I thought, wow, I'm going to know all the answers. All of a sudden, it's going to become clear. That was my first thought, not like, oh, maybe I've died. My fascination with the truth was like, wow, I'm actually going to know what happened. It was almost like I felt like I was going through veils and something was being released. And I was like, wow, it was so trippy. It was awesome. And then I came back. And since then, I've got very comfortable with holding diametrically opposed ideas. So, you know, those things that we mentioned about like, okay, apparently we're spinning, and yet it doesn't appear that there is a spin. I can hold that as a question, and I keep it hanging. It doesn't necessarily need to be resolved right now because I have faith that at some level, the other pieces of the puzzle will come in at some point. And I might also hold another view, plus all my programming from childhood, where I saw a globe all my life, then plus the experience of seeing things through the window of an airplane, which makes it look really curved, and then my beliefs and shock about 9/11, and yet there are unexplained, there's so many different things. Like over the last 10 years, I've been trying to uncode or decode health and understand what health is, because I've been raised into a world that believes that we can't heal ourselves and we need other people to intervene in our health, and that if you have an illness, you take something for it, which may or may not be true. And so I've been really kind of going into this, and it's challenged pretty much everything, because you might be going into this investigation thinking, well, it must be like this because I've had a virus before and I've been told about viruses and this is how it is, and all of our knowledge is based on germ theory, the idea that we've caught something. But then I look around the animal kingdom and the fish and birds and plants and things, and I'm always asking myself, if this is true for us, is it true in the animal kingdom? And more often than not, what I experience is not replicated in nature. And the only place in nature it's replicated is where we've got involved. But like, if you're looking at your new position from a faulty premise, you're not going to find the right answer anyway. And that's one of the things that I find with science. When people say the science is settled, I always want to know, well, what was the starting premise that the science was undertaken from? Because if the initial assumptions are incorrect, it doesn't matter how much you investigate something, it's going to skew your opinion and your investigation.
Yes. Yeah.
A few thoughts.
And this is where, as we grow more aware and conscious, we must grow responsibility. We must become more responsible for our thoughts, our actions, our words, but we have to be more discerning as well. We have to question everything. And that's where children are so good, because they question everything. Why, right? And they're curious. But as we get older, we become less spontaneous with asking questions, many people, and less curious about what makes things work and why this way of looking at it. Because the entrepreneur sees a different way of thinking it. The indigos, the change makers, they see different ways of doing things. They see how it was and realize this doesn't work for everybody. So we need to create something else, which is what the regenerative renaissance is about. It's about Mother Earth renews and regenerates herself. Well, we need to renew and regenerate the human family based on a more universal truth and equity and openness, transparency, equality, all of those things. And in order to do that, you have to imagine what the world would look like, right? And you have to be very curious about, will this work, right? So we need to become childlike again, not childish, but childlike, and have those qualities of children that are adventurous and courageous and bounce back so quickly. So this is, again, this is all part and parcel of the new human being that is being birthed.
I love that. And one of the things I really like about that is the fact that my observations of children is that they are actually deeply trusting. They seem to trust rather than not trust until, we teach them to be deeply skeptical and not trust other people. But this new humanity, presumably, is based on like we've been sold the idea that you can't trust each other. We've been sold this idea that man always sorts himself out first, and that man is selfish. And when I say man, I mean collectively all of us, not men. And that women are superior and all that.
I thought you were talking about my gender there for a while, and you
Well,
you're not wrong.
Well, you know what? In to avoid upsetting people, I'm referring to every human, irrespective of how you choose to view your or identify with your gender. But the idea that it's dog eat dog, and that the animal kingdom is savage, and that we're all looking for an advantage over each other, I think is my experience doesn't bear that out.
No,
it bears it out from when people have been hurt. And if they've been hurt again and again and again and again, then people learn to not trust. But children, when they're born, they are born trusting, and animals are born trusting. And yes, we do have instincts. And, if we get triggered, we might lash out. But usually that's just like if we've got a biological fear, like a biological imperative, which is what you were talking about earlier. And so I wonder how we could take that step, that collective step forwards, when we don't believe in each other so much anymore.
Yeah. Well, just coming back briefly, we need to look at the validity of science, Darwinian science, Newtonian science. Yeah. They may have been a solution at the time, but look how much more we know and how much more access we have for information. So it's sheer folly to hang on to those old scientific principles that may no longer be valid. Yeah. If they are, bring them. Einstein said a lot of really good stuff, right? So it was Darwin that suggested it was the pecking order was the way of things. And some of the religious texts have said that man would have dominion over the earth. Right? And that very statement gives permission to go out and strip mine and deforest and pollute the waters and the air and the soil, because it's been said from an authority. So this is where critical thinking comes in. Right? Was it did it come from an authority, or did some human being think that up?
Yeah.
So coming back to the trust thing, when we find things out, like Father Christmas is not real, and the tooth fairy's not real, which I only found out last week. Right? How are our kids going to trust us with other stuff if we can't be trusted to tell them the truth about fictitious characters and mythological characters, but portray them as the truth? Then how we're setting them up for disbelieving what an adult would say. Is this the truth? And I find that is a good thing, because if we can teach our children to find your own truth, or as some would say, it's not cleared up, so it just becomes distrust. Right? And then you can't trust your partner, you can't trust the community, you can't trust the teachers, you can't trust the government. That trust can just get built upon. And we have to learn to trust each other. And that's where integrity comes in as a value. Honesty, openness, trustworthy, faithfulness, delivering what you promise. That's the package of integrity. And if people have that, they will speak their own truth, right? And they won't fabricate things for their children. And so maybe we'll have a breed of children that's more discerning and more questioning.
It's an interesting one, because, I mean, there's peer pressure in that. And I just want to acknowledge right now, you are sat in possibly the most musical environment. You've got the cicadas. Is there a frog there as well? Wind chime.
That was my belly grumbling. But yeah, there's some more rain coming in. So
welcome, Bali.
Yes.
But I remember. I mean, we've been honest with our children and said that Father Christmas doesn't exist, and neither does the Tooth Fairy. And boy, did we get pulled over the coals for that one. Not by our children, but we had lots of parents, including our own, suggesting that we were ruining their childhoods, that we were taking away the magic of Christmas, which of course is another load of BS, because you can have magic in at any moment, should you choose to. And the funny thing is, our kids still enjoy Christmas. They still enjoy losing a tooth, all those rites of passage. And sometimes they choose to pretend in Father Christmas, even though they know that it's not true. And, one of the things that, I've made sure is our children don't kind of kill it for other kids, because that's like, breaking trust with everybody else, like you're breaking a sort of communal trust. But like the thing that I've heard the most is, it's just harmless fun. It's nothing. Don't be so serious. Don't be such a party pooper. In fact, when I was in my mid-20s, early 30s, my sister called me one day and said, right, your niece is calling you in just a second. I just want you to say yes, yes, yes. Now, she didn't tell me what it was, but my niece called me and said, Auntie Louisa, I just want to know, does Father Christmas really exist? And I felt like I'd been absolutely sold out, because I don't intend on lying to children, but, I had my sister's trust and my niece's, and I lied to my niece, and I felt terrible about it. Because she was actually, I think, 12 at the time, and my sister just wanted her to have one last Christmas. But she'd been questioning the whole narrative, and her whole family had been saying, no, if you don't trust in him, you won't get presents, and all this kind of stuff, and really laying a lot of stuff on. But it's not really my sister. I mean, that's just like, it's seen as harmless. But this kind of thing happens all the time, in so many different respects. How do we have the courage to be honest and truthful when it goes against like the counterculture, and when there's peer pressure to maintain this collective lie? Because I mean, also I notice it as a homeschooler. lots of people, say, oh, well, socialization is important for children, and I always want to ask them, well, says who? And what does socialization mean? Because my children speak to people of all ages, different people every single day when we go out and explore. And yet, sitting in a class with the same people for about 10 years doesn't feel like it gives them as many options, and it's not to pull criticism on that, but when people have this idea as to what is right, we all collectively feed into that and we reinforce that, I think, to make ourselves feel better. How do you counter that?
We have to be strong and courageous to be able to. The 60s was the counterculture. The hippies were the counterculture. And it took bravery and courage to step out of the social norm and express oneself authentically. So the answer for me is just be authentic, right? Be authentic with your perspective. It may or may not be right, but if it's your perspective and you're being honest and truthful about it, now you're being authentic. You're not fudging it. You're not twisting the truth in order to be accepted by mainstream thinking, because it's the counterculture, it's the entrepreneurs, it's the adventurers, it's the brave and courageous ones that change the world. So we give our children the gift by imparting that idea upon them, and not by just going along with their peers. So it's not easy to do, but I'm just recalling when Nikki, my eldest daughter, Doc Martens were the fashion.
I love Doc Martens. I had them for years. I still want another pair, actually.
Every kid in her class had Doc Martens, and birthdays would come along, and Christmas and times, and I would say we'd be in a shopping mall or something. I'd say to Nikki, "Don't you want a pair of Doc Martens?" And she said, "No, I'm just happy with my Dunlop tennis shoes." Right? And she never ever bought them. Never ever bought them. And it was an observable fact that when a kid got a new pair of Doc Martens, the first thing they would do was scuff them up and dirty them to make them look old so they would fit in. So even though you've got a brand new pair of Doc Martens, you still don't fit in because they're new and we've had ours longer. Peer group pressure is so strong. So much so now that the book I'm reading from Gabor Mate is about kids, our kids, when we've been challenging them, talking about them. They go to their 12-year-old peers for advice. Right? What does a 12-year-old know about life? Right? Rather than go to their adults or to their parents, they get advice, they get their communication, they get their socialization from their peers. And I've asked them, where do you get your cues from about what you're going to wear, or where did you get the idea of putting a streak in your hair? All of these things have come from peer group pressure. Okay? And it's their own age.
Yeah.
So we are looking at now, how can we, and I've been doing it for years, just be authentic. Just be yourself. Right? You don't have to follow any trend. In fact, it would be really good for you to do something that is different and become a trend maker. But it takes courage to do that.
Yeah.
So all of these systems are endemic in the human experience, and we have to break out of it. What did Einstein say about the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and again, hoping to get a different result.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work.
Yes. when I look around in nature, I also observe that we live in multi-layered communities. We don't all have all the children looking after each other. Like you might have a slightly older child and slightly younger children, aunts, uncles. In fact, I noticed it a lot when I was living in Bali. But like I've also observed it in the corporate world, you know, as an induction trainer, that, you know, that was what I did for quite a long time. You don't put all the new people, you don't put all the new recruits together to learn from each other. You put them, you know, under the guise of somebody, and then as soon as you can buddy them up with new people, you have them sat side by side with somebody with experience, and you might even shuffle that up, and that's the quickest way to get them on board. To kind of put them to the side and then expect them to get with a program's never going to work. And I think, you know, if corporates aren't going to put their money into that, then that says a lot, doesn't it? You know, because like, you know, their biggest thing is, am I making money? Am I losing money? I'm losing money. Stop that. Where am I making money? Where can I save money? Let's do more of that. So, you know, even from a capitalist perspective, or, you know, like sound business sense, you're not going to put all the new recruits or all the youthful people together. And also, you're not going to put all the old people necessarily together. Like, you know, some of your old time employees, you need them sort of interspersed, because like that, and I don't mean to be ageist, but, you know, like you were saying earlier, we get more conditioned to stay in our ways of thinking, and it becomes a sort of almost like a threat to our survival to change really well-defined routes of thinking. So you keep people sort of interspersed, and it doesn't kind of make, I mean, I understand, you know, why we have old people in old people's homes and children in nurseries and things. That's just an economic decision, isn't it, to process people. But like, if you're trying to get outcomes that make money or create a healthy environment, chances are you're going to mix the age groups up to get a better experience.
Yes.
Oh, it's raining there now. I can hear the rain.
Yes. Beautiful.
And in your lifestyle, your children have got lots of different people of all age groups around them, haven't they?
Yes. And, you know, a leftover from in indigenous ways, our staff are helping to bring them up. So the village, a number of their staff who are Balinese, are imparting part of their culture and ideas with them as well. So it's rather
That's
lovely.
very special. Yeah.
So let's wrap this up. Why do people rely on peer group pressure? Why do people hang on to old ideologies and beliefs and not critically think? Because they don't want to. We all tend to value connection. Everything is about connection. We're connected to our bodies, our thoughts, the earth, the sun. All of this is about connection. So we don't want to sever the connection. So we want to please people so they don't sever that connection. This is what happens with kids and peer group pressure. I want to fit in, right? Because I want people to like me. Because when people break that connection, it's heartbreaking for them. Because underlying that is they don't have the security and the consciousness to be very comfortable in their own space. They're not comfortable with who I am, so they've had to superimpose a facsimile, a persona that is acceptable to the group, so that they wouldn't be ostracized and kicked out. So you see, it's all deep-seated, and it all comes back to what will make me acceptable.
Yeah.
So critical thinking makes you acceptable amongst other critical thinkers, but as we both experience, and many others, it doesn't make you acceptable with those that don't have critical thinking
No.
or just another perspective.
Yeah, in some areas it makes you a domestic terrorist, doesn't it?
Look what's happening. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we need to do? Keep your eyes and ears open. Listen to the voice of intuition.
Mm-hmm.
Trust your heart. Trust your innate knowingness, right? And be guided by, how does this feel? Does this feel like the truth? Does this feel real? Or does this feel dishonest? Or there's something missing? I'm not getting all of this picture.
Yeah.
Be aware when something doesn't feel quite right, or sound quite right, or seem quite right. That gives us the rise. There's the flag. We don't have to discount it, but discernment. I need to be discerning here, because there's something that's not quite right. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something not quite right here. Right? And use discernment all the time, in everything that we're doing. Be discerning. How do I feel about this? Does this seem like the truth? What about this? There's an anomaly here. Is that? How can I question that? And how does that fit into the subject? And look for any discrepancies between what you're hearing or reading and seeing and the behavior of the person behind that. And we know, using politics as an example, politicians will say one thing prior to getting elected, and then it can be up to 180 degrees reversed. So what's being said is not being performed as a behavior. And lastly, think critically. Teach yourself, train yourself to think critically, so that we can be discerning.
I love that last one, teach and train yourself. I would also add in teach and train others, because I've always found, for me, when I need to learn to do something, the quickest route to me learning to do it is to teach somebody else to do it. Because you have to go through all the processes yourself. Exactly. And if you don't do that, the chances are you won't do that. I'm gonna have to love you and leave you now, because I've got to swap over in the studio with my lovely husband. But I wish you a beautiful rest of day, and I look forward to catching up with you next week. And love to everyone in your world, and thank you so much for a lovely, enchanting conversation once again.
Well, thank you, Louisa, and sending big love to you and your family, and again for inviting me into your world. So you are deeply loved. Thank you.
Right back at you. Thank you so much. And to anyone that's listened in today live, I know there's been a few, or later on, I'm sure I'm speaking for Rick here as well. We wish you well. Lots and lots of love. Lots of love.
Lots of critical thinking.
And lots of critical thinking. Anyway, gotta go. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye-bye.